Our thesis statement for how literature and women basically intersect features feminism in literature helps us understand the struggles women face in a society where men are often seen as more dominant. It shows how women challenge traditional gender roles and use their voices to express their experiences and perspectives.
Project. The book that I chose was The Second Sex, made in 1949 by Simone de Beauvoir. The first bulletin that I listed that I thought was very interesting was how Simone talked about gender roles being shaped by society and not biology. A quote that was interesting that she used for this bulletin was, "One is not born but becomes a woman," which she briefly talked about how this is looked at in society but not biology, and how society shapes women into what we call feminine. In other words, gender is not constructed, it's constructed and not natural. Whereas they talked about how women were, the norms were basically dependent and they weren't looked at to be alphas of society, and to basically know their role as women would not work and stay in the house, and take care of children, etc. A second concept that I thought was interesting in the book was Simone talked about, in quotes, the other, in which briefly talked about men to be primary, whereas women were seen to be secondary, in which we look at for men to be independent and women to be dependent towards the men, where men are seen as the default and it's the norm, while women are, like, in the perspective, dehumanizing limits in their freedom. The last bulletin that I found to be interesting was Stages of a Woman's Life, History of Women and the Myths that came along with it, the power that they held throughout history, limited role space, and financial independent freedom, in which Simone talked about real life consequences of how women are raised to be passive, dependent, and focused on beauty, marriage, instead of freedom and achievement. And even society overlooked motherhood towards women and how it wasn't really that important, but basically just what women were set to do and only do. I also am going to talk about the comparative analysis throughout my group. All 5 articles were great and very interesting to read through. The similarities that we all agreed on was the basis of women gaining their rights and power over the centuries and what had happened to them to overcome their oppression, as well as we looked at the differences in our articles, where all women lived a different story in their own unique way.
The Color Purple by Alice Walker is one of the most influential works in both African American and feminist literature. Alice Walker is an American novelist, poet, and activist born in 1944 in Georgia. She grew up in the segregated South, which deeply shaped her writing. Walker is often associated with the term womanism, which she actually coined, which is similar to feminism but specifically centers around the experiences and struggles of Black women. The Color Purple, published in 1982, tells the story of Celie, a poor Black woman in the early 1900s American South who faces extreme abuse, oppression, and silence at the hands of men, first her father and then her husband. Through a series of letters written to God and later to her sister Nettie, Celie slowly starts to find her voice, self-worth, and independence. The major themes of the novel, such as sexism, racism, domestic abuse, and the search of female empowerment, all connect powerfully to the feminist movement. Walker portrays how systems of patriarchy and racism intersect to oppress Black women, showing that their liberation must come not only from challenging sexism, but also from confronting racial and class inequalities. Sisterhood is another key feminist theme in the book. Celie's transformation happens largely because of the women who support and love her, especially Shug Avery and Sophia. These relationships show the importance of female solidarity, mentorship, and self-love in the process of empowerment. Culturally and historically, The Color Purple was groundbreaking. It gave voice to a group of women who had largely been invisible in both mainstream and feminism and African American literature, poor, Black, Southern women. The novel challenged the feminist movement to become more inclusive and intersectional, highlighting that gender equality cannot be achieved without also addressing race and class. When the book was published, the book received both critical acclaim and controversy, but it went on to win the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award, making Walker the first Black woman to win Pulitzer for fiction. Its 1985 film adaptation and later Broadway musical continue to amplify the message of resilience and empowerment to global audiences. Ultimately, The Color Purple helped to expand the feminist movement by showing that empowerment begins with a reclamation of voice and selfhood, and that true liberation must include all women, regardless of race and background.
My section is about Men Explain Things to Me by Rebecca Solnit. This book mainly talks about how women's voices and opinions are oftentimes dismissed or silenced on a world built on male authority. And each of these quotes connects to a different type of feminism, showing the different struggles that women face when trying to be seen and heard equally. The first quote says, "Violence has no race, no class, no religion, but it has a gender." This connects to intersectional feminism, which looks at how different forms of oppression like racism and classism and sexism overlap and collide. Her point here is that violence happens everywhere and everyone is going to face it at some point, but almost every single time it's gender-based violence, the woman is going to be the victim. And the way a woman experiences this might differ depending on things like their race and their class or religion, but sexism affects all women at some capacity, and the thing that unites them as a victim is their gender. The next quote is, "His name is privilege, but hers was possibility." This one represents liberal feminism, which focuses on achieving equality through having equal rights and job opportunities and experiences and everything along those lines. Solnit here is showing how men are oftentimes born with the advantages that women have to fight and fight and fight to someday have the possibility to get. And examples like that are things like respect and authority, along with things like jobs and education. The last quote is, "She struggles with the forces that would tell her story for her or write her out of the story, the genealogy, the rights of man, the rule of law." This quote connects to cultural feminism, which focuses on celebrating the differences and the values and unique experiences and perspectives that women go through and have. What she's saying here is that throughout history, women have been erased from culture and politics and history in general and law. And she really empathizes how important it is for women to bring back their stories and reclaim them and be the ones telling them in the future instead of being written out of them. Overall, this book really brings out feminism as a whole. It's made up of a lot of layers and experiences, and each of these quotes kind of connects to how women keep pushing back to reclaim their voices and keep demanding that equality in different ways.
I did my portion of this project on Lady Justice, which is a book by Delia Lithwick. The full title is Lady Justice, Woman, the Law, and the Battle to Save America. It was written in 2022, and essentially, this book illustrates a time in modern history of feminism, feminist rebellion against unjust political leadership within the U.S. And this is actually a very recent book. Actually talks about some very recent things that have happened, specifically within the Trump administration. This book also highlights anecdotal examples of women overcoming political and law-related issues. Um, there's a bajillion ones in the book, but I have three examples here. One is by Sally Yates, where she basically is battling Trump against the Muslim travel ban during the Trump administration. Next is Roberta Kaplan, and this is after the Charlottesville rally. She kind of was fighting to sue other white supremacists that were basically had their hands on that. And then also Stacey Abrams as well, who is a Georgian who just helped with combating voter suppression, boosting voter turnout, and also she also helped build political infrastructure within Georgia.
This book is an exploration of race relations in America. Written to bridge the understanding between black and white communities, the book unpacks difficult topics such as systemic racism, privilege, cultural appropriation, and allyship in an accessible, controversial way. My book selection comes with an honorable mention. The most wonderful Bell Hooks is an amazing author who revealed the dualic nature of a woman, highlighting the reflective nature of a well-known activist who goes by the name of Sojourner Truth, who, in 1851, begged the question, "Ain't I a woman?" A question that echoes within marginalized communities that wonder, where is the equality? Equality exists inside the beauty of imperfection. A neologism, which is a newly coined word or expression that expresses this well, is matrodonics, meaning feminine man of human nature. This term was coined in reflection of the dominatrix, or masculine woman. Between these two individuals exists an act of creation called sex. Sexual intercourse is the physical act of union between each individual expressing their physical nature. Those who express the sexual nature of their individuality are called bisexuals. The intercourse is defined as the inaction of the mind, body, soul, and spirit through love. This intersectionality overlaps systems of race, gender, and oppression. The author's contribution to this translates academic ideas into accessible dialogue. It frames anti racism as active love and moral accountability, and it calls men to recognize patriarchal privilege and practice emotional literacy. Therefore, I encourage you to be emotionally intelligent and mature when reflecting the nature of expression. With the cooperation of man and woman, you only get the adversity of beautiful people who understand the compassionate nature of strength is equality. Marginalized groups exist in a way that encourage love, respect, and kindness from one another, and elegance correlates to the natural progression of each individual. I know that if we can come together randomly as a group to talk about these attributes, identifying these attributes within ourselves is the biggest challenge. However, there are astrological ways that you can find out more about yourself. So, be brave and be great.